Hi, Steve here. Welcome back to another edition of Big Bore Guns. Today we're going to be answering this question. Could I buy a big bore gun that I could use for self-defense? I'm talking to somebody out there that might have the big bore gun fever. They enjoy shooting large caliber guns. They may be looking for something they can use for hunting, but they also need something for self-defense because they're not going to go out and buy a bunch of other guns. They're not going to buy a tool specifically for that. So they've decided, hey, I'd really like to get a big bore gun, but I need something that's more universal. So we're going to look at some calibers and guns you might consider for that option. I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to give you any legal advice. So before we get into the conversation exactly which guns these are, let's talk about how much foot-pounds of energy you need generated from that projectile to use as a self-defense weapon. Most authorities will recommend that you have at least 300 foot-pounds of energy coming from that muzzle so you can have the right penetration and be able to stop someone should you get attacked. That's one of the reasons the 9mm is so popular, because it does have between usually 300 to 400 foot-pounds of energy. Now, a lot of people would say, hey, the 9mm is a little underpowered for an all-around type self-defense round. And that does have some truth to it. You know, back several years ago, the FBI adopted the .40 caliber, which ballistically is around 400 foot-pounds of energy, a lot more effective round. But the problem was, for the general person using that round, they can't handle the recoil. And if they're recoil sensitive, well, a .40 caliber is a little bit more gun to handle than a 9mm. So most law enforcement agencies did transition from a 40mm to a 9mm. It was easier for somebody to learn, and it is important to be proficient in your firearm, so they felt that was a better overall cartridge to use. So let's stick somewhere between like maybe 300 and 450 to 500 foot-pounds energy. I think that's pretty a good average to have when you're considering a self-defense round. So before we start, I've already taken care of safety checking these weapons. Don't worry about them. I'm not going to be touching the triggers or putting anything near them. So to begin with, let's eliminate a couple of these weapons. Now, I'm not saying you could never use them for a self-defense situation. I'm just saying there are better choices. And these are two that I really wouldn't consider. They're going to over-penetrate. They generate over 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. And there's not a cartridge you can put in them that would bring a lower energy level. So the first one, of course, is my favorite gun. The Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum. Now you can get a 500 special, but still you're over 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. The problem is not only that you're going to just destroy whatever it hits, it's very likely if you ever had to use a Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum, you're going to cause some other damage. And then we have the Magnum Research Desert Eagle. Now a 50 AE cartridge is in a similar spot as the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. It's slightly less power, but it is over 1,000 foot-pounds of energy, which means it's way too powerful to use in a typical self-defense situation. So stay away from these 50 caliber guns. I would not want to go into court and tell the attorneys, hey, yeah, I used a 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum as my choice for self-defense to stop the target. So with the 50 calibers out of the way, let's drop down a bit. The next one we're going to talk about is one I would consider ideal for both self-defense and for hunting. This caliber can be used to take out any game in any continent in the world. Plus, it works great as a self-defense in the right situations. Now, this is not something you typically want to carry on your side because it's just very, very heavy. But if you had to defend yourself, like in a home protection situation, this might be a good choice for you. This is a Smith & Wesson 460 Magnum. I'm not recommending you take and shoot a 460 cartridge in this for self-defense, or even a 454 Casull, because it can also chamber that cartridge. What I'm talking about is using something like a 45 long Colt. It's one of the most versatile cartridges, probably why it was used for so many years in self-defense in the Old West, because it produces such a vast array of energy. You can go all the way from like 200 foot-pounds of energy all the way up to about 400 foot-pounds of energy with the 45 long Colt. So I think if you pair the 45 long Colt with the versatile 460 Magnum handgun, you have a good choice for self-defense. And with the right bullet selection, you're probably near that 9mm foot-pounds energy. And of course, the 460 when you're shooting a 454 Casull or 460 Magnum As long as you can handle the recoil in the 460 or the 454, there's a lot of options to use that also for hunting, for protection against dangerous game. So it's a good all-around cartridge. One of my favorite cartridges for that matter. And if you like recoil, that 460 Magnum is a lot of fun to shoot. And since we're talking a little bit about a 45 long Colt, the Taurus Public Defender can make an ideal self-defense gun. It's got a short barrel. It easily holsters. You could carry it concealed if you wanted to. We've already discussed the 45 long Colt, so there's a lot of options for that for this handgun. But also the 410 is proven, when you use self-defense loads, to work really well in a firearm like this. All right, so the next option, a 44 Magnum. Until recent years, the 44 Magnum was the most powerful handgun you could get, and a very formidable cartridge for using for hunting. The upside on the 44 Magnum is you can also use a 44 Special, which you're looking at between about 300 to 360 foot-pounds of energy, so that can be a good round to use in self-defense. It's nowhere near the power of a 44 Magnum, but if you decide you want to go hunting or go out and shoot some big bore guns, you have that option with this same gun. And then one of the number one choices for most people would be something like this. The 45 ACP. For years, the 45 ACP, of course, was one of the number one choices for self-defense. And it is capable of producing the energy you need. A typical 45 ACP produces about 350 foot-pounds of energy, which is a great balance when you're talking about getting a self-defense type cartridge. The only issue is a lot of people are very uncomfortable with shooting it because typically the guns are larger and it does have more recoil than something like a 9mm. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think makes a good big bore self-defense rounds? What would you consider carrying in most situations in a typical self-defense situation, or to have around your house for home protection? Do any of these firearms sound like they would work good for you? Or do you have a firearm you specifically really like for that situation? I appreciate if you go ahead and comment down below and let us know your thoughts. Also, if you'd like or subscribe, that would be great. It really helps this channel out a lot. I'll see you again next time on Big Bore Guns. I appreciate you watching.